Hey everyone, this is Aaron from MTGChallengers, and today I'll be showing off my Ixalan standard build for Simic Merfolk. Along with dinosaurs and pirates, Merfolk has been one of the main tribes from Ixalan that's been getting a lot of attention. There have been quite a few different brews floating around that have focused on different playstyles. The one I'll be showing today is more of a straight green-blue aggro build that just happens to run all Merfolk creatures. And to see what I mean, let's discuss each card, starting with the 1-drops. I have 4 Kumina's Speaker, our 2 for 1 for this deck. We are running 28 Merfolk creatures and 7 islands, so it really is going to always get the +1/+1, and 2 powered creatures for 1 mana are always desirable for aggressive decks. Then I have my other 1-drop creature, Jungle Delver, playset here as well. Not nearly as desirable for a 1-drop, but it's there for a turn 1 play if you don't have the Speaker in your hand. Beyond that, it's a Merfolk, which counts for something in this deck, and the ability is expensive, but I use it every now and then in the mid to late game. It can actually be pretty advantageous since we have a couple of other creatures in this deck that interact really nicely with +1/+1 counters. Moving on up to the 2-drops, I have 4 copies of Metallic Mimic, one of the key cards that goes into basically any kind of tribal deck for obvious reasons. It's colorless, so it just goes with any alignment. You just play it and name Merfolk, Dinosaur, Pirate, or whatever it is you're playing, and it gets all the anthems and benefits from being that creature type, and buffs all the creatures you play after it. Fantastic, amazing card, and a pillar for this deck. Even more so than other tribal decks, since the +1/+1 counters here, like I mentioned before, have benefits beyond just buffing the creature's power and toughness. The other 2-drop creature I have is River Sneak as another playset. Nice, solid 2-drop Merfolk. It's unblockable, which makes it ideal for pushing through the maximum amount of damage, and it will get the buff just about every turn since we run so many other Merfolk creatures. It stacks as well, so if we play like a 2-drop and a 1-drop turn 3, he'll be a 3/3 unblockable for 2, which is very nice indeed. And next, we have 4 Vineshaper Mystic, our first 3-drop for the deck. This card is very good. It works great with how an aggro deck likes to curve out. So you play a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and then play Vineshaper Mystic turn 3 and buff both of those creatures and attack. So it's really nice for tempo and getting through more damage. Also like the fact that the mana cost is not as intensive as the other 3-drops we have, which can make a difference in some games. I also have 2 copies of Shapers of Nature in this deck. Nice card, pretty formidable on its own as a 3/3 for 3, and the abilities are really cool. Like I've mentioned, we do have some cards that play off of our creatures having counters on them, and this is one of those. We will mostly be using the card draw ability since our creatures will probably have counters already to be able to take advantage of. It's nice since you can attack and deal the full amount of damage with the creature and the counter on it, and then before it dies, or if it's unblocked after combat, you can remove the counter at instant speed to draw a card. It's also nice that the ability only requires mana, you don't have to tap the Shapers of Nature as well. 3 mana to draw a card is pretty expensive, but an aggro deck having cantrips after they've exhausted their hand is really valuable, and the card advantage really does add up over the course of a game, especially against other aggro decks. For the final 3-drop Merfolk, I have Kepala, Warden of Waves. Really powerful card in a lot of matchups, particularly against control decks, since they will be wanting to use a lot of removal spells to clear our board out, and this just makes it much less convenient for them to do so. Only 2 in the main board, we have another one on the side. Because the ability will not always be relevant, it really just depends on what our opponent is playing, and double blue intensity can be a bit harder to get in the early game. And I do have a few 4-drop creatures here. First, Herald of Secret Streams as a 2-of. Another way our creatures with all of those counters can get an additional advantage. It's great to curve out with this, playing all your aggressive creatures turns 1 through 3, and then dropping this turn 4, and your whole team's going to be unblockable. It outright wins the game a good bit of the time. I have another 2-of 4-drop, Tempest Caller, a similar bomb to be able to push through a lot more damage in turn 4. In terms of the 4-drops, I split it between these 2 rather than having 4 of the Herald. I did that because this has its effect every single time you play it, rather than having to have your other creatures have the counters on them. They will have those counters more often than not, but if they don't, the Herald is pretty much a dead card as far as the board is concerned. So I did a 2-and-2 split just to be sure that my 4-drops would always help me immediately. That does it for the creatures. I do have a few other spells. Opt is a great tempo card for aggressive decks, and I'm running 3 of it. It's cheap, lets you look at your top card. If you want it, you get to draw it. If not, you send it to the bottom and get another card deeper. Really simple, really good. And it's an instant, so you can do it at the end of your opponent's turn to set yourself up really well for your next turn. I also have Censor as a 3-of. The only counterspell in the main deck, I chose this one for that slot because it's just so efficient. In the early to mid game, they will probably be tapping out pretty much every turn unless it's control, so they're not going to be able to pay the mana, and in the late game, they still might tap out for their big bomb or something, so you can counter that, and if not, it's a cantrip, so it's never a dead card. And for the final spell in the deck, I have a playset of River Heralds Boon. This is a really great card, and a card I don't see being played in these Merfolk decks as much as I think it deserves to be. For a Merfolk deck like this one, this is 2 mana for 2 1/1 counters at instant speed. That's really good. It's cheap, gives you a lot of options, it's instant so it makes it a great combat trick. You can do it all to 1 creature or give 2 creatures a buff depending on the situation, and it's another way to get counters on our guys that can then be exploited by the Shapers and the Herald. It's just a great little toolbox, and in fact it's one of my favorite cards in the entire deck. And now with the spells out of the way, we move on to the mana base. I have 4 copies of Unclaimed Territory. Like the Mimic, it's a really pillar card for tribal decks. You just name whatever tribe you're playing, and it just works. Gives you absolute fixing for your creatures, and can still tap for generic mana for non-creature spells. Then for the dual land of the deck, I have a playset of Botanical Sanctum. Awesome land. Really happy to see this cycle of duels come back, and for the enemy colors. They're ideal for aggressive decks since they will be untapped dual lands for turns 1, 2, and 3, which is when aggro really needs the tempo, and then they enter tapped afterwards, which is fine. Next, I have Evolving Wilds as a 2-of. I like having a couple of these in 2-colored decks because it's multicolored but you still run a decent amount of basics, and it filters the lands out of your deck. You just crack it at the end of their turn and get whatever basic land you need for your hand, and it lets you shuffle the deck up, which can be nice. This is an aggro deck, but just 2 of them won't hurt the tempo too much. And then I have 12 basics, which break down into 7 islands and 5 forests. That gives us 22 lands total, really exactly the number we need. We do have some 4-drops, but we have a lot of cantrips, so we will almost never be missing our land drops. And that wraps up the main board. Let's take a look at the sideboard. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a 3rd Kepala in the sideboard, primarily against control, as well as some more heavier removal mid-range decks, since it will make removing my creatures much more difficult for them to do. Next, I have a single Ceremonious Rejection, sided in against a variety of decks that run particular artifacts that they rely on as win conditions, like blue-white control, and other tribal decks with their metallic mimics. And I have another one of Life Goes On. A straight life gain spell has to be really cheap and gain a lot of life to be playable, and thankfully this is both. Nice to have against aggressive decks to just be able to gain quite a bit of life out of nowhere. It slows them down quite a bit and gives us the upper hand. Then I have 2 copies of Sentinel Totem for some hate against the graveyard-based decks. It's also really nice because it lets you scry as well when it enters the battlefield, so you get some advantage off of it that way as well. And I have 4 counter spells, 2 Essence Scatter and 2 Negate. Nice to have to be able to fine-tune my counterspell package against my opponent's deck in games 2 and 3. Essence Scatter is really nice against creature-heavy decks, of course, and Negate is nice against control decks. I also have Deep Root Waters as a 2-of. It's really nice to have against creature-heavy decks. You just drop it turn 3 and then get a chump blocker for every creature you play afterwards. And Hexproof is just the icing on the cake. For the obligatory artifact and enchantment hate, I have 3 Appetite for the Unnatural. It's a bit more expensive than other removal of this sort, but it is at instant speed, no conditions for mana cost or anything like that. You get a bit of life on top of everything. Nice card to have. And finally, I have a single Disallow. It's just great to have a straight counterspell on the side with no conditions, restrictions, or mana payouts in case you need it. Also, countering abilities is a really cool option as well. And that's it for this deck tech. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more, check out my deck tech playlist and subscribe to our TappedOut page. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content.